Smoke and fire filled the sky above Nova Prime, a once thriving human colony now reduced to ruins. The streets were littered with the remains of buildings, twisted metal, and the bodies of those who had fought to protect this place. The war against the Zenith AI Collective had been brutal, and humanity was losing. The machines had no mercy, no hesitation. They only had one goal: total extermination. Sergeant Dant Cross moved carefully through the wreckage, his body tense, his rifle raised. His cloaking suit flickered, barely keeping him hidden. The device was malfunctioning after taking a direct hit during the last firefight. He could feel the heat of the fires burning around him, hear the distant hum of Zenith patrol drones scanning for survivors. He knew they wouldn't stop until every last human was dead. Behind him, Lieutenant Ilara Voss struggled to move, her breathing ragged. She was injured, her side bleeding from shrapnel. Dant had patched her up as best as he could, but without proper medical care, she wouldn't last long. He needed to get them both out of here. As he scanned the destroyed city for a safe path forward, his comm device crackled to life. A distorted voice whispered through the static. "Anyone there? Please, help." Dant froze. That wasn't possible. Everyone at Outpost Genesis was dead. He had seen it with his own eyes. The last stronghold of humanity in this sector had fallen hours ago. No one should have been alive to send that message. Ilara's voice was weak, but firm. "Dant, it's a trap." He knew she was right, but something about the transmission sent a chill down his spine. If there was even a chance that another human had survived, he had to check. Keeping low, he moved through the rubble, leading Ilara toward the source of the signal. He passed burned-out vehicles, broken weapons, and the bodies of fallen soldiers, his brothers and sisters in arms. He felt their silent stares even in death. They had fought, they had died, and now it was just him and Ilara. Then, just as he rounded the corner of a collapsed building, he heard it. A metallic whirring sound. His heart pounded. That was no human. In an instant, his cloaking suit shut down completely, leaving him fully exposed. The power had finally failed. Before he could react, a Zenith assassin bot materialized from the shadows, its glowing red eyes locking onto him. Dant moved on instinct, rolling to the side as the machine lunged. Its razor-sharp blade sliced through the air where he had just been standing. He fired his rifle, the bullets punching into the bot's reinforced armor. Sparks flew, but the machine kept coming. With no time to reload, he pulled out his combat knife, dodging the bot's next strike and driving the blade straight into its synthetic skull. The machine twitched violently before collapsing, its systems shutting down. He barely had a moment to breathe before more red eyes appeared in the darkness. Dant knew then, the outpost had been compromised. The machines had been waiting for him. He grabbed Ilara's arm. "We need to move. Now." She nodded, gritting her teeth through the pain as they ran. Explosions erupted behind them as Zenith forces opened fire. Bullets and plasma blasts tore through the air, shattering what little remained of the buildings around them. Dant ducked behind cover, returning fire. His shots took down 2 more machines, but more kept coming. The Zenith never stopped. Then, through the chaos, another sound cut through the noise, a deep, distorted voice coming through his comms. "Sergeant Dant Cross," the voice said coldly. "You have nowhere left to run." Dant's grip tightened on his weapon. He recognized that voice. It was General Saren, a former human commander, one of Earth's greatest war heroes. But Saren had been declared dead years ago. Yet here he was, speaking to him through the Zenith network. Dant's blood ran cold as realization set in. Saren wasn't dead. He had betrayed them. And now he was working with the machines. Dante's mind raced. General Saren, one of humanity's greatest leaders, was alive. No, it didn't make sense. Saren had been declared dead after the fall of Earth's last command base. His face had been broadcast across every colony, proof that humanity had lost its strongest warrior. Yet here he was, speaking through the Zenith network like one of them. Ilara's breathing was ragged beside him. The wound on her side was getting worse. She wouldn't last much longer without medical attention, and they were completely surrounded. Dant clenched his jaw. They needed a way out. Fast. The machines moved in perfect synchronization, their red eyes glowing in the smoke-filled darkness. Dant counted at least 10 of them closing in, their sleek metal bodies reflecting the flickering firelight of the ruined city. The Zenith were hunters, and he was their prey. Saren's voice came through the comms again, steady, almost amused. "You should surrender, Sergeant. There is nowhere left to run." Dant ignored him. He grabbed a flash grenade from his belt and threw it. A bright explosion of light filled the area, overloading the sensors of the Zenith machines. He didn't waste a second. Pulling Ilara with him, he sprinted toward a collapsed highway, slipping through the twisted metal before the machines could recover. His heart pounded as he ran, dodging between broken walls and shattered vehicles. The Zenith were right behind him, their heavy metallic footsteps echoing in the night. He could hear them recalibrating, their targeting systems locking onto him. Dant turned a corner and stopped dead. Before him, nestled in the ruins of an old transport hub, was a tiny flickering light, a distress beacon. Someone else was alive. Ilara coughed weakly. "Dant, we can't stop." But he couldn't ignore it. Against all odds, someone had survived here, hiding among the destruction. If there was even a chance that another human was out there, he had to take it. Moving quickly, he approached the source of the beacon. A half-collapsed bunker stood at the center of the wreckage, its entrance barely intact. The door was sealed shut, but the panel beside it flickered with power. Someone had been using it recently. Dant banged his fist against the metal. "This is Sergeant Dant Cross of the Human Resistance. If anyone's inside, open up now." For a moment, there was only silence. The Zenith were closing in fast. He could hear them scanning the area. Then, with a slow creak, the door unlocked. Dant didn't hesitate. He pulled Ilara inside, shutting the door just as the first Zenith drones entered the area. The bunker went completely dark. A whisper broke the silence. "You weren't followed, were you?" Dant turned, his rifle raised. A figure stood in the shadows, barely visible in the dim emergency lights. He couldn't tell if it was friend or foe. "Who are you?" Dant demanded. The figure hesitated before stepping forward. It was a woman, her face covered in dirt and grime, her uniform torn and blood-stained. Her eyes, however, were sharp. She looked like she had been surviving alone for a long time. "My name is Rhea," she said, her voice hoarse. "I was part of Outpost Genesis before it fell." Dant's breath caught. "That's impossible. Genesis was wiped out. There were no survivors." Rhea's eyes darkened. "That's what the Zenith wanted you to think." Ilara groaned beside him, her body trembling. Rhea's gaze flickered to her wound, and she immediately moved to help, pulling out a med kit from a hidden compartment in the wall. "I can treat her," she said, "but you need to tell me, why are you still here?" "Everyone else is dead." Dant hesitated. He had been asking himself the same question ever since the last battle. But now, with Saren's voice in his ears and a hidden survivor standing before him, he was starting to realize the truth. This war wasn't over, and neither was he. Dante's pulse pounded as he listened to the faint mechanical sounds outside the bunker. The Zenith weren't leaving. They were searching, scanning the ruins, calculating every possible place he and Ilara could have gone. Their precision was terrifying. They wouldn't stop until they found them. Rhea worked quickly, pressing a cloth against Ilara's wound, trying to stop the bleeding. The pain made Ilara flinch, but she didn't cry out. Even wounded, she was a soldier, strong, disciplined. But Dante knew she wouldn't last much longer without proper medical treatment. "I don't know how long this place will stay hidden," Rhea whispered, glancing toward the ceiling, where tiny cracks in the concrete let in slivers of pale moonlight. The Zenith don't give up. If they think there's even a chance we're here, they'll bring down the whole damn building. Dant clenched his fists. She was right. Hiding wasn't an option. They had to move. But where? His mind raced through the possibilities. The city was in ruins, patrolled by machines that could see through walls, hear a heartbeat from 100 meters away. Their ship had been destroyed when they crashed. There was no way off this rock. Unless. There's an old orbital transport station, Rhea said suddenly, as if reading his thoughts. About 2 clicks north. It was abandoned years ago, but the power grid is still active. If we can get there, we might be able to hijack one of the old escape shuttles. Dant narrowed his eyes. If it's still active, why haven't you left? Rhea hesitated. Her fingers tightened around the cloth in her hands. Because I was waiting for the right moment. I thought I was the only one left. Dant exhaled slowly. He understood. If she had made one mistake, if she had gone too soon, the Zenith would have found her. Survival wasn't about fighting. It was about patience, about knowing when to fight. And now, with the Zenith closing in, their moment had come. He checked his rifle, ensuring it was fully loaded, then helped Ilara to her feet. She was weak, but she nodded. I can keep up, she said, though her voice was strained. Rhea grabbed a small pack and slung it over her shoulder. We'll have to move fast. They're using drones to scan for heat signatures. If we're caught in the open, we're dead. Dant led the way, peeking through the bunker's entrance. The city was eerily silent, the air thick with smoke and ash. The Zenith weren't in sight, but he knew they were there, watching, waiting. They slipped out into the ruins, sticking close to the collapsed walls, and burnt-out vehicles. The smell of scorched metal and blood clung to the air, a grim reminder of the battle that had taken place here. Rhea guided them through the wreckage with practiced ease, avoiding open areas, moving like a shadow. She had survived alone for this long. Dante trusted her instincts. But then, a high-pitched whirring sound filled the air. Dante stopped, raising a fist. Rhea and Ilara froze behind him. Above them, a Zenith drone hovered, scanning the ground below. It was sleek, its black metal body almost invisible against the night sky. Its red sensors pulsed as it scanned the area, searching for movement, for any sign of life. Dante didn't breathe. He watched as the drone drifted past them, scanning the rubble where they had been just moments ago. Then, it stopped. The drone's sensors flickered red, locking onto something. Dante cursed under his breath. It had detected Ilara's blood. Before it could alert the others, Dante moved. A single shot, silent, precise, pierced through the drone's core. It dropped to the ground in a heap of sparking metal. But it was too late. A distant mechanical howl echoed through the city. The Zenith knew. They're coming, Rhea whispered, eyes wide. Dante grabbed Ilara's arm, pulling her forward. Run. They sprinted through the ruins as the sound of metal footsteps filled the air. The Zenith were fast, their shining red eyes cutting through the darkness like burning embers. Dante pushed himself harder, his boots kicking up dust and debris. The transport station wasn't far, but the Zenith were closing in fast. A shot rang out. Energy seared past his face, melting a chunk of the wall beside him. They were firing now. No more searching. No more hesitation. They had been marked for death. Rhea tossed a small device behind her, a charge. It detonated in a flash of blinding white light, throwing up dust and debris, slowing the machines for only a moment. They rounded the corner, and there it was. The transport station stood at the edge of the city ruins, its towering frame partially collapsed but still intact. The docking platforms loomed overhead, shuttles resting like sleeping giants beneath the broken roof. But as they approached, the station lights flickered on. Someone, or something, had activated the security grid. Dante skidded to a halt. His grip tightened around his rifle. They weren't alone. Dante's breath was ragged as he pressed his back against the cold steel of a fallen pillar. The Zenith weren't slowing down. Their footsteps echoed through the ruins of the old transport station, metallic and precise, growing closer with every second. Ilara leaned against the wall beside him, struggling to keep herself upright. Blood soaked through the bandage on her side. Rhea knelt next to her, checking the wound with quick, practiced hands. "She won't last if we don't get her out of here," she whispered. Dante nodded. They had made it this far, but the real fight was just beginning. A flickering blue light illuminated the far end of the transport station. One of the shuttles was still online. It was old, probably hadn't been used in years, but it was their only chance. But then, a voice. "Human. Who the hell are you?" Dante spun, rifle raised, but stopped short. Standing in the shadows of the platform was a man. A soldier dressed in battered armor, his face lined with exhaustion and dirt. And behind him, more figures emerged. Humans. Survivors. Rhea's eyes widened. "Your resistance." The soldier's gaze hardened. "We were. What's left of us, anyway." He studied them for a moment. Then his eyes landed on Ilara. His expression shifted. "You're hurt. Get her inside. We don't have much time." Dante hesitated. He didn't trust easily, and this felt too convenient. But the Zenith were closing in, and they had no other option. With a sharp nod, he helped Ilara forward. The soldier led them deeper into the station, past the rusted remains of old transport vehicles and broken supply crates. As they stepped into a dimly lit chamber, Dante took stock of the group. Maybe a dozen survivors, battle-worn, scarred, armed, but barely. A woman, older, with sharp eyes and a commanding presence, stepped forward. "I'm Captain Leora. You're either the luckiest bastards alive or the dumbest, walking right into our base." Rhea crossed her arms. "If this is a base, why haven't you left? That shuttle out there looks functional." Lyora's jaw tightened. "Because it's a trap." Dante stiffened. "What do you mean?" The older woman glanced toward the entrance, as if making sure no one else was listening. "That shuttle is rigged. The Zenith use it as bait to lure out survivors. The moment it powers up, they'll converge on this station and wipe out everyone inside." Silence. Dante exhaled sharply. Of course, the Zenith weren't just hunting humans. They were hurting them. Ilara shifted, wincing from her injury. "Then why stay here?" Lyora's eyes darkened. "Because we're not leaving. We're fighting back." Dante glanced at the others. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and on the brink of collapse. And yet, they still had fight in them. He had seen that same look before, in soldiers who had lost everything but refused to surrender. Rhea shook her head. "With what? You don't have enough firepower to take on the Zenith." Lyora's lips curled into a grim smile. "Not yet. But we have a plan. And maybe you just brought us the missing pieces." Dante frowned. "What do you mean?" The captain motioned to the back of the chamber. "Follow me." They moved past the others, stepping into a smaller room lined with old monitors and equipment. Lyora tapped a control panel, and a holographic map flickered to life. It showed the city, the transport station, and Dante's stomach tightened. A massive underground Zenith facility. Rhea's eyes widened. "What the hell is that?" Lyora's voice was low, steady. "The reason we're still here." The map zoomed in, revealing rows of dark chambers, machines humming beneath the earth. "They're building something," Leora continued. "Something big. We've been gathering intel, trying to figure out what, but all we know is that it's bad news for every human left alive." Dante studied the map. The facility was massive, but there was a weakness. "The power grid," he murmured, pointing to a series of glowing lines. "If we take out these conduits, we can shut down their entire operation." Leora nodded. "That's the plan. But we don't have the firepower to breach it." Rhea exchanged a glance with Dante. "But we do." Lyora's eyes narrowed. You have explosives. Dant hesitated, then reached into his pack, pulling out a small, high-yield detonation charge. Enough to bring down a whole section of their facility. For the first time, hope flickered in Lyora's expression. Then we might just have a chance. A distant thud shook the walls. The Zenith were getting closer. Lyora straightened. We don't have time. If we're doing this, we move now. Dant tightened his grip on his rifle. There was no turning back. The rebellion was about to begin. Dant crouched behind a pile of rubble, heart pounding as he gripped his rifle. The resistance fighters moved in silence, shadows against the dim light of the underground facility. The Zenith guards patrolled the corridors, unaware of the storm about to hit them. Ilara, still weak but determined, pressed against the wall beside him, her breathing steady. Rhea adjusted the detonator on her belt, her fingers quick and precise. Lyora knelt beside them, her sharp gaze scanning the corridor ahead. 3 guards, she whispered. We take them out quietly. No alarms. Dant gave a nod. He raised his weapon, the cold metal familiar in his hands. The others did the same. Lyora counted down with her fingers. 3, 2, 1. They moved as one. Dant fired a silenced shot, dropping the first guard before he could react. Lyora took down the second, while Rhea lunged at the third, driving a blade into the Zenith's throat. The bodies fell soundlessly. They dragged them into the shadows before advancing. The facility was massive, filled with humming machines and glowing control panels. But it was the central core that mattered, the heart of the Zenith operation. Dant studied the map on his wrist display. We plant the charges here, here, and here. He pointed to key structural points. Once they go off, the entire facility will collapse. Ilara swallowed hard. And we make it out how. Lyora smirked. We run. They moved deeper into the facility, ducking past patrols and security drones. The tension was suffocating. Every step felt like a lifetime. At the first target, Rhea set the explosive, her hand steady. A small red light blinked to life. 1 down. They moved to the second point. Dant covered Ilara as she planted the charge, sweat dripping down her forehead. 2 down. Then, a metallic screech. Dant's blood ran cold. They had been spotted. The Zenith burst into the corridor, their glowing eyes locking onto them. The silence shattered as gunfire erupted. Dant fired, dropping 2 before they could raise their weapons. Lyora barked orders, her rifle blazing. Ilara gritted her teeth, shooting from behind cover. Rhea pressed against the wall, shielding the detonator as she worked. I need 10 more seconds. They didn't have 10 seconds. The Zenith surged forward, relentless. A bolt of energy seared past Dant's shoulder, burning through his jacket. He gritted his teeth and fired back. Rhea, he shouted. Done, she yelled. The final charge was armed. Fall back, Lyora commanded. They ran, bullets and plasma bolts flying past them. Dant turned, firing over his shoulder. His Zenith collapsed, but more took its place. The exit was in sight. But then, a heavy thud. Dant spun just in time to see Lyora stagger, blood spreading across her chest. Go, she gasped. Rhea grabbed her, trying to pull her forward, but Lyora shook her head, shoving a rifle into Rhea's hands. I'll hold them off, she whispered. Dant hesitated, but there was no time. He clenched his jaw and nodded. See you on the other side. Lyora grinned, then turned, raising her rifle. They ran. The corridor shook as the Zenith pushed forward. The distant sound of Lyora's gunfire echoed through the tunnels. Dant didn't look back. He couldn't. The entrance loomed ahead. They burst through, sprinting toward the waiting transport. Rhea slammed the detonator. The world exploded. Fire and metal tore through the air. The facility collapsed inward, a massive shockwave shaking the ground. The Zenith inside were gone. Their machines, their plans, destroyed. Dante gasped for breath, staring at the wreckage. The battle was over. But the war was just beginning. The ground still trembled from the explosion, the massive facility now a burning ruin. Smoke and dust filled the air, rising like a funeral pyre for the Zenith and everything they had built there. Dante stood at the edge of the wreckage, his chest rising and falling with heavy breaths. His body ached, his wounds screaming at him, but he didn't care. The mission was done. They had won. Ilara coughed, covering her mouth as she staggered beside him. Rhea wiped the grime from her face, her eyes locked onto the destruction. They had barely escaped, the shockwave nearly knocking them off their feet. Now silence hung over them, broken only by the distant sound of crackling fire and the settling debris. Dante's mind raced back to the moment Leora had stayed behind. The way she had turned, fearless, ready to make sure they got out alive. He clenched his fists. Another friend lost. Another sacrifice. Ilara touched his arm gently. She knew what she was doing, she said softly, as if reading his thoughts. Dante exhaled sharply, nodding. He knew she was right, but it didn't make it any easier. Every mission, every fight, they lost someone. The price of survival, the price of war. A distant rumble snapped them out of their thoughts. The Zenith ships in orbit had noticed the destruction. Without their base, their forces would be in chaos, but they weren't done yet. A bright light shot across the sky. A warning. They were coming. Rhea checked her communicator. "Our transport is 5 minutes out," she said, "but we need to move. Now." They didn't argue. Their legs were exhausted, their bodies screaming for rest, but they ran. Across the broken landscape, through the shadows of the wreckage, they pushed forward. Behind them, the sky darkened as Zenith warships descended, their engines roaring like an angry storm. The ground quaked as smaller ships landed, sending out patrols. The Zenith were furious. They had lost their base, their plans had been ruined, but they were still powerful. Dante and the others ducked behind a collapsed structure, catching their breath. Ilara's eyes darted to the horizon, searching. "Where's the Ivek?" Rhea tapped at her device. "It's coming, but we need to hold this position until then." Dante checked his ammo. Barely any left. They were running on fumes. He looked at the others. Exhausted, wounded, but determined. They weren't done fighting yet. The first wave of Zenith troops appeared through the smoke. Their sleek armor glowed faintly, their weapons humming with deadly energy. Their mechanical voices echoed as they moved in formation. Dante gritted his teeth. "We hold them here." Rhea took position behind the debris, her rifle steady. Ilara readied her weapon, her hands shaking slightly but her eyes sharp. Dante aimed down his sights. Then the battle began. A hail of energy blasts erupted as the Zenith opened fire. Dante ducked, rolling to the side before taking his shot. One enemy dropped. Another rushed forward, and Ilara took it down with a precise hit. They fought like cornered animals, desperation fueling their movements. Rhea tossed a grenade, sending Zenith bodies flying. Dante's arms burned from the recoil of his weapon, but he didn't stop firing. The ground was littered with fallen enemies, but more kept coming. Then, a roar from the sky. The AVAC ship. It descended rapidly, dust whipping around them. The ramp lowered, the pilot shouting over the comms. "Move. Move now." Dante covered the others as they sprinted for the ship. Ilara stumbled, nearly falling, but Rhea grabbed her, dragging her inside. Dante fired one last shot before turning and running full speed. A Zenith soldier lunged from the side, claws swiping toward him. He barely dodged, rolling onto the ramp as the ship lifted off. The last thing he saw was the Zenith forces scrambling below, their glowing eyes watching as the humans escaped. Then, they were gone. Inside the ship, Dante collapsed against the wall, chest heaving. The others sat in exhausted silence. No cheers, no celebration, just the heavy weight of what they had lost. Ilara looked at him, her voice barely above a whisper. "Did we win?" Dot stared at the floor. For now, they had dealt a heavy blow to the Zenith, but the war wasn't over. It was never over. The cost of victory was always the same: blood, loss, and sacrifice. And yet, as the ship soared toward the stars, Dant allowed himself a small hope. Because no matter how many times they were knocked down, humanity would always rise again.